Today on the Star Trek Universe podcast, we are talking about the brand new Short Trek Q&A right after this.
Welcome to the Star Trek Universe podcast. My name is Matthew Carroll.
I am David C. Robertson.
What's happening, Davo?
Man, just all the blessings from the Star Trek gods raining down upon us.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It's pretty great.
Yeah, man. Star Trek mana.
So let's dive right into Q&A. This is another short trek. The basic plot synopsis is it's a little short one about Spock and Number One on the Enterprise, Pike's Enterprise, getting trapped in an elevator and having a conversation. It was interesting. I thought it was almost like they were doing some work to get Spock into the place he is in the original series. Like they were trying to cover up some of his sort of flair that he had in Discovery.
A little bit that, and not even because it happens before Discovery. It happens, in fact, before the Cage. So that's interesting. And if you look at the Cage, he does smile, he does have more emotion, and he does shout, which is what I really loved about him. He does such a great Leonard Nimoy in the Cage shouting thing at the beginning, and she's like, "No need to shout, Ensign Spock."
Yeah, I thought this whole thing made me feel like he was Spock. Like I was seeing him, I think, maybe more as Spock than I even ever really saw Zachary Quinto. Like he just felt like Spock to me in this episode. Okay,
yeah, there are big places where I feel like that's true, and then other places where I feel, much less. I'm always going to have a hard time getting over Nimoy. I just always will.
Yeah, for sure. I say that. I think that's more, like I said, more so than Quinto maybe ever did for me. But I still, there's also moments in here I'm just like, really? Like when they laugh after they sing a song together, that seemed, him singing didn't seem weird. Him laughing the way he did after singing, like almost like a giggle, that they're having so much fun, seemed a little off character for him.
Well, go check out Amok Time when, after he believes he's killed Kirk, he goes back up to the Enterprise to turn himself in, and for killing the captain. Kirk comes out from behind the corner because McCoy simulated Kirk's death to get him out of the Ponfar sequence. And Spock, just a big goofy grin, grabs Jim by the shoulders and goes, "Jim!" Like, just, all right, well, I mean, no. Like, I think there's a lot of giddiness in Spock that is just always wanting to come out, and he keeps it down. Yeah. So that didn't seem, too
off character
too off character, especially considering his age and what we've seen in the canon so far of Spock. He touches a flower and he grins, big toothy grin. So yeah, that seemed all right for me. I loved that the people outside were like, "I swear I hear them laughing." One of the things I really enjoyed about this is, in the Cage, Spock was not emotionless. He was not supposed to be emotionless. That was Number One. That was going to be her role. She was the first officer. She was going to be emotionless, like a walking computer. I think they said something.
Oh, neat.
Something like that.
I didn't know that. That's neat.
Yeah, and two of the big notes when they said we're not doing this on the show was, like, the test audiences hated Number One because all the women were like, "Who the hell does she think she is?" And They wanted to get rid of Number One, and they wanted to get rid of Spock because he looks satanic. Yeah. Roddenberry fought because Network wanted him to get rid of both of them. The Network fought for both of them. Network came back and said, "You can keep one." So as Roddenberry often put it, he married the girl and he kept the Vulcan.
Well, so that's interesting history to put under the backdrop of this episode, because this episode now almost feels like a nod to that trivia, because the two of, it's basically her teaching him to keep his, what'd she say, keep your freaky to yourself?
Yeah.
Which I don't know, man. I don't have a real problem with it, but it did bother me a little bit. I'm like, that they don't talk like that. But I don't know. I'm so of two minds, because part of me is like, what are you doing? That's not how they talk in the Star Trek world. But then part of my problem with some Star Trek is that they don't talk human enough. And so I like it. It's just, it still makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, and look, I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad call. It's probably what I would do if I was making a prequel to the original series. I would have them all talking in that old 1960s, 1950s patter, like they did. So, that probably wouldn't play well today.
No.
So that's why I'm doing a podcast about Star Trek instead of running it.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, that's why. That's absolutely why.
It's the only reason. They asked you, but then you told them what your plans were for the speech.
Right. It's not because of my complete lack of experience or know-how or
talent, really.
Yeah.
I'm just teasing, man.
Yeah. No, you're right.
No, you're I'm teasing. Okay, so any particular things that stood out to you in this actual short trek, though?
I really liked the Q&A. I really liked how annoying Spock got to her.
Yeah.
And how his questions gotten more and more, out there, more and more heavy, as she put it.
I really hated the one answer when he asked about the morality of the Prime Directive, because I really want that conversation. Like, I would love for them to actually have the conversation of what is it? He's like, it's morally logically it's morally indefensible, and then she's like, "You better let that one go, Spock." I'm like, no, don't let that one go. If it's morally indefensible, I want to hear about it, and I want to hear her defend it. I don't want to hear them just ignore this tenet of their entire federation and not talk about it. And she was like, "You better put that away. It'll drive you crazy." I'm like, what? No.
Yeah.
That's exactly the conversation I want to hear, you jerks.
I really liked that.
I hated it. I hated it so much.
The reason I loved it so much is because so many fans have brought that up, and the Prime Directive is about way more than logic. And if you measure it from a logical standpoint, the whole series is going to fall apart. Star Trek is going to fall apart for all of us. So just shut up and enjoy the show.
No, see, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm currently, we have the Orville Universe podcast over with Matthew Westfox, and we talk about this. One of the things they haven't done in the Orville is they don't have a Prime Directive. Mm-hmm. And they have some similar tenets about not, interfering with certain societies or whatever, but it's not a hard and fast rule like it is in Star Trek. And I think they deliberately left that out because they didn't want this sort of blanket statement they'd always have to try to fight against or whatever. So instead it's a lot more of a case by case basis. So they constantly have to have the conversation of should we interfere with this or should we not? And I really enjoyed that, and I'd really like to hear them on Star Trek discuss why the Prime Directive is what it is. We've had it endlessly explored in its practice, but I've never really heard it defended as to what. I don't know. I guess they have defended why it exists, but
yeah, sure they have.
We've been talking about it so much, how, especially in the cases of particularly Star Trek Into Darkness is probably the one that is the most egregious use of the Prime Directive to me. Mm-hmm. Because they say this species is about to be all destroyed, so we can't interfere. And I think that's too far.
Yeah.
Like, who cares if you interfere with their development if they're all gonna die? Mm-hmm. That's not a good use of the Prime Directive. So I'd like to hear it defended for, if nothing else, the Star Trek Into Darkness's sins.
I would like to do a rewatch of all of Star Trek with the tenets of the Prime Directive, like, specifically in mind, and just see how much, like how much they actually
explore or whatever.
Explore it, stick to it. What awful ethical, moral and or ethical problems arise out of it, and how much of that is actually addressed among the characters, and how much their decisions are different from episode to episode, and how much they actually tackle that. One episode, Picard makes this decision. Another episode, 3 seasons later, he makes the complete opposite decision because a different writer wrote it and thought, well, this is clearly the right way.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, I know that Janeway has contradicted herself quite a bit because the fans documented that shit.
Yeah. I'm sure there's documentation of where Kirk has done it at this point.
Probably.
At this point, the internet has logged everything about Star Trek. One of my favorite Q&As that they had was the question about what are the 3 most prevalent characteristics of Captain Pike.
Yep, I liked that.
I liked it a lot. It really made it. I don't know. I just love Captain Pike, and even though he doesn't appear in this episode much, he's only in it for a moment. That was such a great summation of his character.
Right, and that summation is as follows. 1, his capacity for hearing out another point of view is exceeded only by his willingness to change his own once he's heard you out.
Love that.
2, yeah, absolutely. 2, even though he is the most heavily decorated fighting captain in Starfleet, he views resorting to force as an admission of failure. And 3, he is utterly unsentimental except when it comes to horses.
That's probably, I mean, the Admiral says it in Discovery Season 2. She says the reason they kept Pike away from the war was because he's the best of them and he needed to survive. And to me, that's all of that is Federation 101. I don't know. I loved it. I love those as just commandments for life. Just being willing to hear others out and being willing to change your own opinion. I'm blanking on the second one. See, this is why I'm not a better person. What's the second one?
I don't know. Stop listening. That's why I'm not a good person.
What's the second tenet you just read of Captain Pike?
Even though he is the most heavily decorated fighting captain in Starfleet, he views resorting to force as an admission of failure.
Yeah, love that. I love that. Willing to fight for what you believe in, and willing to really go for it and be good at that. Knowing that sometimes that's important, but viewing it as a failure when it happens, because that's the last resort. Yeah. Oh man. Love it. I love it. It's just great. Pike is great. This episode made me love Pike even more.
Yep. I think we're all fools if we don't think that they're trying to cook up a Pike series.
Yeah. And as much as I really hate the idea of doing more prequels, I really want some more Pike. I could just see him doing a couple movies or something where it's a little less ongoing, a little less whatever. Yeah, but I think they should definitely do more with Pike. They definitely should do more with Pike. All right. Any other major points or major moments you wanted to point out in this little short trek?
Well, it's using up my trivia, but did you notice the music in this episode?
Not off the top of my head. What was it?
Michael Giacchino served as a supervising composer on this episode.
Oh, fun.
So there were some, that themes very, very, very much from the '09 Abrams music.
Yeah, I did notice that they were. I noticed they were interpreting. I should have said this. I would have sounded smarter. I did notice that they were sort of interpreting the original series theme through the lens of the sort of 2009 Star Trek.
Yes, they did.
And so, yeah, that makes sense.
And I absolutely adore Michael Giacchino. I love all of his stuff. And for my money, the score in those Star Trek Abrams movies, even though I enjoy them, the score is the best part of them. Yeah,
it's a really good score. It's really good. Any, you want to get to any other trivia, or we got anything else? That's it.
That's really it, man.
Well, that's it for Q&A. I think we're trying to keep this one pretty short because these are short treks. We try to keep our episodes shorter than the episodes that we watch. We don't always pull it off. But I really enjoyed this. It was weird in some places, but I enjoyed it. So,
yep. Do Vulcans ever feel awe?
We do, but we try to keep it to ourselves. I dig it. All right. Well, guys, we'll be back with you in a few days. Again, we're going to start covering our Picard Data Borg rewatch. So
7 of 9. Remember 7 of 9?
7 of 9. Yeah, she's in there. I was lumping her with the Borg, but you're right. 7 of 9.
She is separate from the Borg now.
She doesn't seem like she can really get away. So we're going to be covering all things leading up to Picard, and we're going to start with Measure of a Man from Star Trek The Next Generation. So please check out that episode, watch that at your leisure, and we'll be back with you in about a week with a week or two with a review of Measure of a Man and kind of discussing kind of the place of androids in Federation society and what we think that might mean for Picard, the series. All right, everybody. Peace.
Leisure. And live long and prosper.
To reach out to us, hit us up at StarTrekUcast.com, at StarTrekUcast on Twitter, or search for the Star Trek Universe Podcast on Instagram or Facebook. And if you want to hear more from David C. Robertson, search for the DC On Screen podcast in your podcast app now, or go to maladjusted.tv for his comedy sketches. If you want to hear more from me, Matthew Carroll, search for the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast or the Orville Universe podcast in your podcast app, or check out my music. Just search for Matthew Carroll wherever you listen to music.